What if the system meant to help actually misunderstood you? Welcome to Bipolar Talk, the podcast where we turn our bipolarity into an opportunity. I'm Clément Bessat, founder of Upstage and also Bipolar Type 2. Today, we are diving into the gap between research, clinical psychology, and real-life experience. Because too often, what works in theory doesn't fully land in daily life. I'm joined by Zsofi de Haan, a psychologist, clinical psychology researcher, and deeply involved in lived experience research here in Australia. And yeah, Zsofi, can you present yourself?
Hi, Clement. Thank you so much for having me on today. It's wonderful to be here with another like mind. So a bit about me. So I thank you very much for the wonderful introduction. I guess the starting point for me is I also have bipolar type 2, which has really been the driving point of everything that I've done career-wise since and continues to be. I'm a registered psychologist here in Australia and a clinical psychology registrar. I run a private practice where I see clients, and then I also work in biomarker mood disorder research. So, looking at the role of circadian biomarkers, inflammatory markers, cardiometabolic markers in mood disorders with a focus on bipolar. And I also look at the role of circadian rhythms in mood disorders, which is something that's we're learning more and more about as time goes on. And then I also spend quite a bit of time working in digital health research in mental health and lived experience research as well, and how we can integrate lived experience, expertise, and insights into mental health research across the spectrum, which is something that's gaining more broad acceptance in Australia now, but we're certainly continuing to learn and grow in that space on how we can have that best practice moving forward. So that's a little bit about me.
It's awesome. And so maybe you have a subject in mind that you're a bit more passionate at the moment because there's so many things we can talk about. But I feel like it's important for us to understand a little bit like what's behind, what's about the science. Because as someone with bipolar, I was totally lost when I got diagnosed. I didn't had a clue about what are the different treatment. Should I take a treatment? How can I find a psychologist? How can I know it's the right one for me? How to find a psychiatrist? Like all these different things. And maybe I want you to get us back a little bit there because you have those knowledge, you've made those decisions. But as a clinical psychologist and a patient, how would you advise people to choose that psychologist? It could be you, maybe, but if there's someone else.
They're all fantastic questions, come on, because they're things that I've seen so many of my clients ask, and they're things that I've asked in my own journey as well. And I think it touches on a really core point, which is that when you first become unwell and then when you get diagnosed, which may or may not be around the time when you first become unwell, and often there's a delay there, you don't know what you don't know. And you don't know what best care looks like. You don't know really that much about your condition. You don't know who to talk to about it. You hear about psychiatrists who are doctors, psychologists who are another form of mental health professional who work more on the mind side of things. But then you hear about, there's counselors, there's mental health nurses, there's, community supports. Where do you start? Where do you go? Who knows what? And the answer really to start with this conversation is probably to say that the different resources out there, be that professionals or groups and things like that, they all have a little bit of a piece of the puzzle, and no one has all the information. And we're actually still in research learning so much about bipolar. There is so much that we don't know. One of the key things that I find that often occurs is that we have a lack of collaborative care, which means that, you know, bipolar is looked at as a medical condition and, responds to medication, and you see a psychiatrist and then that's the treatment path. Some people see it as psychological. even though there's a lot of evidence to support that now it is a medical condition, but psychological because it affects your mood and it affects your energy, and therefore you see a psychologist and you get treatment from a psychologist. Ultimately, we need to be having teams of clinicians and carers working together. And when I say carers, I also mean family and loved ones as well, because they're part of that system too for people with bipolar when they're newly diagnosed. In terms of choosing the right psychologist, that's a question people ask across the space, whether they've got bipolar or anxiety or relationship challenges or whatever it may be. Everyone goes, well, who's the right psychologist for me and how do I know? Ultimately, the first thing is it has to feel right. It's a relationship, it's a connection. And it is, especially when you're going through something like living with a chronic mental illness, it's really important that you have those touchstone people that you feel connected to, that you feel you can be safe with, vulnerable with, communicate with, and be genuine with, and that they will also be genuine with you and will help guide and support you towards what your goals are. Sometimes, initially, when we get diagnosed with bipolar as well, though, it's about having support around what are realistic goals for me? What are my goals? What could that be? So, finding psychologists who have an understanding of what bipolar is, not just in theory, in terms of, well, in Australia, we use, and US and many parts of the world, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual. Um, Looking at in terms of not just symptom check boxes, but what can it be like for someone to live with the condition? Um, you know, being able to feel that you can collaborate, all of those things, and tailor. When I work with my clients, I try and tailor my care to each person because it's different for everyone. And that's the thing. You can also have someone that says, this person would be fantastic for you to see. And you may see them and go, oh, that doesn't feel quite right. Doesn't mean they're also not a good psychologist or a good psychiatrist. It just means they might not be right for you. But that's one part of the piece. And then you've got the GP, the psychiatrist. My personal opinion, working in, so I do a lot of research in biomarkers at the Brain and Mind Centre at the University of Sydney in mood disorders. And my opinion is that it's best to see a psychologist that understands some of the latest evidence base on the physiological mechanisms involved in bipolar, in particular, the role of circadian rhythms in mood disorders and the emerging research there. So, for instance,
Maybe, yeah, because
yeah,
circadian rhythm is like something that I learned a little bit in the past, but
mm,
maybe it's important to re-explain a little bit the basic.
yeah,
Because to go back also about my lived experience, sleep is probably the most important thing for me.
yeah,
And how do I get my 9 hours of sleep? I'm a big sleeper.
yeah,
And so uh, maybe, yeah, you can explain a little bit like what your research found and how can we do it in a practical way.
absolutely. So we've done a lot of work in looking at not only how mood disorders affect sleep and affect circadian rhythm. So, as you've just talked about, come on, like you've noticed your sleep, it can be a bit challenging there. And a lot of people with mood disorders struggle with sleep. I'm one of them as well. I've always had a tendency when in phases of depression to oversleep, to go to sleep later, to wake up later. And when in more those hypomanic kind of phases, to sleep less and feel like I need less sleep. And what's happening there is the brain has a master clock, basically, in lay language. And that master clock links in different organ systems have a clock, and then most but not all cells have a clock. And for the body to work properly, those clocks have to line up with each other. And they have to line up with the day night cycle as well. One of the things we see, if you take someone like with bipolar when they're hypomanic or manic and they stay up all night, it's like their body thinks it's daytime during the nighttime. And that's where their circadian rhythms, so the rhythms that are controlled by that master clock in their brain, are not syncing to the day night cycle. So, circadian rhythms, we have some core group ones, and they affect all sorts of systems in the body. So we have your sleep wake cycle, which is the one that most of us hear about, body temperature, core body temperature. We have cortisol secretion, dim light melatonin onset. So that's your sleepy hormone. So at night, for instance, when you're getting ready to start to go to sleep and it's getting towards sleep time, that rhythm is meant to, the melatonin's meant to increase in your brain. But what sometimes happens is when that rhythm's out of whack, it's not increasing at the right time, and therefore you don't get sleepy at those times. And what we find is we're predicting quite a large percentage of people in bipolar. There's now actually a circadian rhythm dysfunction that's actually instigating and perpetuating the condition. That master clock in the brain is impacted by a handful of genes, and there is some research that shows that those genes can actually be faulty, essentially, in people with bipolar, making them more prone to anything that disrupts those rhythms. So, in terms of how we normally set our circadian rhythms to the like day night cycle, is it's actually through predominantly morning sunlight. And we go out into the sun hits our eyes, it sends messages to the master clock in our brain, and that starts to tell our brain and then cascades down the different systems what time of day it is, and therefore when we should be eating, when we should be sleeping, socializing, have more attention and concentration. And with people with bipolar, that can be a bit off. It's also why we tend to see that people with bipolar are more vulnerable to having episodes at certain times of the year when there's more shift in light. So that's normally around the equinoxes in the year. So um, March, April in Australia, September, October. And you'll actually find, and I used to work in an inpatient psychiatric unit, and I actually noticed just through observation, there'd be a lot more people with bipolar during those times that would end up actually in hospital. And that's because the rate of the light coming up in the morning is more rapid. It's kind of exponential, and it destabilizes those clocks more. You can then combine in stress, which can create inflammation in the body. And that's why people with bipolar, especially if they have high stress around seasonal changes and those times a year, are more prone to episodes. So it's quite complex stuff, and there's still a lot we're learning about it. But we're noticing that there are these malfunctions in circadian rhythms that come from basically a more fragile master clock for people, a lot of people with bipolar. The great thing about it, though, is, and what we're learning, and this is the role of psychologists in many ways and other health professionals, is that there's a whole range of behavioral circadian strategies you can engage in that can help stabilize your clock and actually help treat mood episodes without medication, or in combination, even better often, with medication that can also affect that clock. So lithium, for instance, is a drug that's been around for decades. And for many, many decades, we had no idea precisely why it was so effective for people with bipolar. And the primary reason there is that it stabilizes the master clock. It's also neuroprotective. So when there's an inflammatory response occurring, it's also protecting the brain. So psychologists to go back to the original question, that are ideal to see when you've got bipolar are those that are aware of some of these circadian interventions that you can do to help manage yourself. And I can say from a lived experience perspective, I'm almost 35. I got diagnosed when I was 25. I got sick when I was 14. So a long delay. But when I got diagnosed, I got taught about all the circadian stuff that we knew at the time about a decade ago, and we're still building on it. And just knowing that there were things that I could do to help manage my condition and to manage my sleep. And one of the biggest ones is managing your sleep, trying to stabilize that sleep wake rhythm. But more importantly than the amount of sleep, it's actually getting up at the same time every morning. That's one thing a lot of us don't know. And I find that having been given that when I was in my mid-20s, it gave me a sense that for things that were totally out of my control with my condition, there were these small things that I had a bit of agency and a bit of control over still, over something that was creating so much grief and loss for me, because I couldn't control my brain, I couldn't control my mind. But I started to learn with my psychiatrist, who does research in this field too, that I can manage these things. And for instance, I also work with my psychiatrist even now around seasonal changes. We keep a closer eye on my medication and we adjust. So those types of things. So it's choosing a psychologist that is may not know everything, none of us do, right? But is willing to be up to date on the latest research, because bipolar is something that we're still learning so much about. And what I love to see is when we realize that you can actually combine the medical sciencey stuff with the psychological stuff, it actually goes together. And having a team around you that does that together. So, yeah, some of my experiences.
Yeah, and maybe let's go a little bit in on practical thing because I
Mm,
feel like that's the beauty of science and live experience is to help us find things we can change on our
yeah.
everyday routine. And one of the things you talk about is waking up at the same time every day. So I'm really curious to know also what you guys think in the comment and what helps you sleep better because I feel it's not something that is easy and everybody got his little tips.
Mm.
I will share mine. Something which is quite easy to do is like sleeping mask and earplug. I feel a lot of people are not doing it, and it really helped a lot. Do you have other tips, Sophie?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Oh, a very simple one as well is sleeping. This sounds counterintuitive. I was having a great chat with someone in my family about this other day who has bipolar, and is sleep with the blinds up, because then the light hits your eyes in the morning and you're waking up at the same time every morning. Now, even when your eyes are closed, light still does go through. And so that's actually really good. So we really recommend people actually sleep with their blinds up if they can, unless there's some blaring bright lamp outside your bedroom window and you can't. But otherwise, waking up to the natural light is really good. But I liked something that you said, Clement, about some of these things are not so easy. And this is one of the big things around finding good support when you're living with bipolar, is that, it's if I had my psychologist hat on, it's very easy for me to say to someone, "Oh, you just need to get up at the same time every day." Now, I can tell you when I've been in depression, yeah, that's not an easy thing to do. And I can be told that that's what I need to be doing. But how do I actually help maintain that? And going to see a psychologist as well that sets expectations that this is what you must do and it's prescriptive, it actually sets you up for a sense of then feeling like you're failing. And when I work with my clients, I say, this is what we aim for. Also acknowledging that it's really hard to do this stuff and you don't need the added pressure of feeling like, and a lot of people with bipolar are quite perfectionistic too by nature. We have high standards of ourselves. We're quite creative. We're quite intelligent normally. Is not having another thing where when you're already feeling awful, that you feel like you're going to let yourself down again, or you're letting your care team down, or you're letting your family down. And so things for me that I find helpful, um, I lie out, and ever since I had my first major episode and was really sick, I always lie out my clothes the night before, simply because I know in the mornings when I'm not great, I'm not as good, and it takes more to get going. So it's one less thing to think about, it's one less decision. So I try and reduce the amount of decisions I need to make in the morning by setting some things up the night before. I even do that when I'm well now. It's just part of my habit. I have a local coffee shop I go to. No matter where I live, I always end up becoming mates with the local cafe owners. And I was having a great chat to one of the managers the other day, and he said, "Joe, if you're always here, and we always love having you here." And I said, "Well, I always love come seeing you guys and having a chat, and this is how I start my day." And he was sharing with me stuff about his mental health, knowing what I do professionally. And I shared with him as well that, you know, you guys might think that you're just serving coffee, but you're actually creating a place where for someone like me, when I've had mornings where I'm living with my depression, my goal would be just make it to the cafe. I can't think any further in the day. I can't face getting out of bed because I feel like I've been hit by a truck. I feel so depressed. But I go, You just need to just put some trackies on, just get to the cafe, have a coffee. And I said, and you guys are the smiling faces that people like me that live with depression and bipolar see. That's what you do. Don't underestimate the positive, profound impact you have in people's lives every day. And they never thought of it like that. And these are all the little things where if you read a research paper on it, and I know this because I write some of them, I contribute to them, we'll write, you know, up at the same time every morning out of bed. But the nuances in doing it are these types of things, making friends with the cafe people, even if you're not a coffee drinker, just a hot chocolate or, in my household, we got a kitten at the end of last year. And you know what? She has to be fed every morning. And if you sleep slightly late, she'll let you know that she needs to be fed. And, having another creature like that to care for actually helps you care for yourself. And so, working with a psychologist and I want to say peer workers are worth their weight in gold. Not as well known around the world as psychologists and psychiatrists, but peer workers are people with lived experience like myself or you, Clement, who, you know, choose to spend time and support people going through similar things that they've been through and share lived experience wisdom and just be a listening ear. Sometimes that's what you need as well, someone who gets it. And that's really what this is about, this podcast, in many ways, I think, is people that, have that lived experience of going through some of these things. But it's the more I'm hoping over time we move towards combining the clinical practice with the research insights that we're developing with the lived experience nuances like the laying your clothes out the night before or just committing to getting to the coffee shop or, you know, those types of things. And psychologists that are helpful, psychiatrists that are helpful, understand the importance of all of those parts, even if they only offer one of those parts, or they can at least help link in with other bits. Yeah.
And it's really about, you explain it like really building a system for yourself.
Mm.
And everybody has this different thing. For you is coffee. For me, I would say is, yeah, I don't work from home, for example. I go to the co-working space. It's important for me to go out so I have some fresh air, have some light every day. And I also know that I I don't want to go to in the subway or something. I want to walk to work or bike to work because it's really important. And everybody has his own thing. But
Well,
yeah, if you want to react,
Mm,
sorry.
no. I just said, well, like, you're going and working in a space, the cycling, that's all creating structure in your day, right? Which, from a future thinking, looking forward to things, is really important. To circadian rhythms is really important because it's telling your body clock what time of day it is. And it also allows you time to socialize, and that also helps your body clock and it allows for options for good things to come in. If we stay at home all day, we are going to probably sleep more and we are going to be less social. And a lot of things start to kind of they compound, they go down. So it's kind of like, it sounds to me like you've got a sense that I know that sometimes I'm not great, but these are some of the things I put in place to help keep me on track. Is that what it's like for you in a way with these things? Yeah.
Quick break. Can you let us a review on Apple Podcasts or the platform of your choice? It really helps us break the stigma around bipolarity. Let's get back to the episode.
Yeah, totally. And to go back to sleep and circadian rhythm, like it's like having the right temperature in the room, which is like, for example, most of the time we don't share the same blankets with my fiance because like I want it colder than her. And it could be simple, but for me, it makes a big difference because then it's not as warm and then I don't wake up in the middle of the night sweaty.
Yeah.
It could be also a lot of things. It could be like um, when I take my shower at night and And then basically I only listen to music. I stop listening to, I don't know, a YouTube video or a podcast
Mm.
and also the fact that when I'm in bed, I will write. I love to write a lot. And I just put my thought on paper and all those little things put together help me sleep much better. But if you have other one, I really love those type of practical thing because as you say, you have the theory, which is the circadian rhythm, but then how do you do it for yourself?
And in practice, I love what you said about it's the little things together, and it is, right? And I often approach living with bipolar like living with any other medical condition, like diabetes, for instance, right? You treat the condition, but then you've still got to deal with all the stuff that goes with that, right? So when you've got diabetes, you might take insulin, and there's the medicine part. Like with bipolar, we might have the medicine part, but you still have to manage what you eat. And there might be a sense of loss of pleasure around that, or grief over not being able to eat what you want. You have to manage your exercise. I've come across some people who make different lifestyle decisions based on what they think they can manage living with a condition like that. There's, things around what's my future going to look like, and the worry, what if I get sick again? What if I end up in hospital? Who's going to take care of me? What if my medication stops working? Bipolar is no different, right? And it's a medical thing that I put it as has psychological impacts. And it also affects who we are. Not in that it has to be who we are, but that I know for me, not a day goes by where I'm not managing my condition every day. And I think one of the biggest things that I've found that I've had to navigate for myself, and I keep evolving trying to figure it out in terms of practical things, is the balance between having structure, like we're talking about, and routine, but also recognizing that you're living with something that requires a degree of flexibility. So, how do you know when to clock over into almost flexibility mode, but not give yourself too much flexibility that you lose all the structure that kind of keeps things going along, you know? Or I remember when I was younger and I was a lot less well, um, I used to have a rule that was if I thought I wasn't okay, I had 3 trusted people I'd phone, and if they each said, "Yep, you're not okay," then I'd go, "Okay, off to hospital." But that was another little practical system that I have. Um, I think as well, recognizing that in terms of practical things, you're living with a complex condition that can shift and change and has a lot of different things to it. People with bipolar, for instance, are more prone to having a weakened immune system. There may be listeners today who notice that they catch colds quite a lot, or different things like that. That can be associated with bipolar. The body temperature thing, people with bipolar have been found to sometimes have difficulties regulating their body temperature because it's another circadian rhythm. So having those things around like a cooling blanket, I came across those the other day for the first time. I just got myself a weighted blanket. And when I was getting a weighted blanket, I saw cooling blankets. And I thought, what a great idea, because I certainly have had those times where I'm I'm like a furnace, and then I'll be normal again for a couple of weeks. And that can at times for some people be that rather than their body temperature dropping during sleep like it's meant to, it's not doing that. So your body's trying to do all the other stuff it's meant to do with sleep, but the body temperature part's not shifting. One of the really interesting papers we came out with recently at the Brain and Mind Center is around not just misalignment of your rhythms to the day-night cycle, so like wanting to be awake when it's nighttime or eat during the night, or your melatonin being really low when it's actually sleep time and it should be high to help you sleep, is also misalignment between the rhythms. So it's actually like a symphony. They're meant to dance together in a certain rhythm, in a certain relationship to one another. And we actually found in a large cohort of young people that there can actually be misalignment that precedes mood issues. And so then you go, well, what does circadian misalignment look like in practice? And how do you navigate that in practice? And so it's starting to as well become aware of what some of your circadian rhythms are and how they might be operating. And so learning how to, and we're very early days at this, it's like there's more research about how to synchronize through practical strategies to the day-night cycle. So a good one, for instance, is swimming in cold water in early afternoon spikes your cortisol, which is really good when you're in a depressive episode. So that's a good practical thing to do, right? To stabilize that one rhythm. But how do we stabilize them together to each other in the right way? And the way that I started to think about it was becoming more aware of what my different circadian rhythms were doing in terms of how I was experiencing them in my body. And so in terms of practical things, some of it, I think the big difference I noticed for me from 10 years ago to now is just my level of awareness of what's going on for me. You mentioned turning down, like not having as much noise and stuff at night. Stimulation is another big one, right? So have you ever found, Clement, that you get affected by how much noise there is or how much you talk to someone if you're in a certain state, that can drive you up or in various ways? I've found that for myself, right? And so it's recognizing as well, like there's another factor, stimulation. And I actually got really, about 10 years ago, just not long after I got diagnosed, I got really sensitive to noise one day. And someone in my family who has bipolar said to me, give it a few days and you're going to have a depression flare, like clockwork, right? And now I know when I'm aware that I'm getting noise sensitivity, I need to reduce stimulation. I need to manage my stress. I need to bunker down a little bit. Similarly, when I've been up, I know that I can almost push myself up further by doing more work, by talking more to people. And so then it's like, it's kind of, we call it opposites. That's when you might do the opposite of what you feel like doing, and that's the taking care. So yeah, it is like building a toolbox of all these things and almost like levers that you can pull and push depending on where you are. But that's the difficult part of living with the condition that can go unrecognized by a lot of people, which is regardless of where you are in terms of depressive episode, hypomanic, manic, mixed, even euthymic, you're always having to keep an eye on what things do I need to push and pull in terms of practical strategies
Yeah.
to maintain my
And
wellness.
and one thing I wanted to react is we can do a lot of things ourselves.
Mm,
And I do believe, yeah, we are the first one who can manage it. But
yes.
it's also about asking for help and having a team around you, because now with Zsofi, I would say we are stable, both of us.
Mm,
So it's way easier, we learn, we we made mistake, and
yeah.
we found out like what works for us. But maybe it's not your situation. Maybe you're still struggling and finding, and I'm still struggling sometimes.
Yeah.
And so what helped me the most, I would say, is having people that I can count on, where I can ask help, and
Mm,
most of all, to be not like, don't not let my ego tell me that I can manage it myself.
yeah.
Is really like,
Yeah.
even in, I could be like calling my mom, like, hey, I'm not doing well. But just to talk about it and to do it prevent myself to go really bad.
Absolutely. I love that you say that because, I I chuckle because what comes up for me when I hear you say that is I do a lot of shoulding when it comes to my health, and like I should be well, I should be coping, I should be able to do this project right now I'm working on, I should be well enough to go do XYZ. And it creates more stress and it creates more pressure. And yeah, sometimes, and it's really hard, but sometimes there is a lot of strength in just saying, actually, hey, like picking up, hey, I'm not okay today. Um, could we postpone? Or one of the things I've learnt more recently, probably with myself, because it's an ongoing journey. Do you find that? Like you're constantly learning things about yourself, no matter how long it's been since you got sick or got diagnosed. And one of the things I'm learning is, that is there like a middle ground? That, hey, I might not be able to come into work today for this meeting, but I'd still like to show up for it. Could we do it online, please? Like doing what you can do and being okay that that's still good enough. Um, you touched on the idea that people might be in different places. And, you know, one of the things that's so important for me with a lot of stuff around podcasts and public speaking for people in the mental health space is just remember that when people are in a place to speak, they're typically more well. And so know that though that they've probably been in a place you're in if you're struggling or you're not there yet or you're whatnot. And hey, tomorrow they could also be in that place. And so it's not, don't think that, for instance, me talking like this is me every day. It's not. And when I'm experiencing depression, I'm certainly not talking, at this speech rate. I slow down, I go into hibernation, my thinking slows, all of those things. Um, and so I think acknowledging that as much as podcasts are fantastic, they're not always representative, a lot of the public speaking we do. I think I've only spoken publicly once myself when I've been severely depressed. It doesn't happen very often for most people. And so for those that are listening that are struggling, everyone has different journeys. Some people go back and forth. I definitely had the misapprehension when I was diagnosed at 25 that when I saw the doctors and I got on treatment that then I'd be well. I can tell you it took 3 years of finding the right medication combination before I was stable. 3 years, um, which is a long time, and I know doesn't always sound wonderful. And once we figured it out, I was really good for a very, very long time. But sometimes I do have people that come see me and they say, well, I tried the medication, it didn't work. And so I'm never going to be okay. It takes time and people do go through different phases. And, I had a particularly stressful year last year. And for the first time in 7 years, I had an episode. And that was a depressive episode. And luckily, I'd learnt more and I had skills and I was able to function through it. But it's kind of as well, remember, like when you've got bipolar and you're not well, it's no different to having the flu or, having a nasty cold or something. Like, would you beat yourself up for finding it hard to get to work or those type? Probably not if it was those things. But when you've got bipolar, we seem to have these different expectations of ourselves. And yet our immune system changes, our energy level changes. And the analogy I love that we've shown with a lot of bipolar stuff now, especially with the circadian stuff, is around hibernation. And that when people with bipolar are depressed, it's like we're bears that hibernate. Our appetites change. We often withdraw socially. Our sleep changes. We get irritable, right? If you push us to do stuff too much that we don't want to do, right? If you poke a bear with a stick, it's not going to be too happy with you. And we slow down. But similarly, when we're hypermanic or manic, it's like it's spring. We come out, we have lots of energy, we want to run around and be productive, hunt and gather, mate, all of those types of things. I really love that model of bipolar. And I guess the reason why I share this and I link it into the practical stuff again is conceptualizing myself on those days as I'm in bear mode. I just need to accept that I'm in bear mode today. I'm going to do what I can in bear mode and know that I will come out of bear mode again. And it shifts back and forth in that way. But yeah, that's what I
What you're
find.
talking about is really important, is like accepting that we are what we are. We are different. We are sometimes a little bit more like range of mood. And even when we take our treatment, even when we try to do the right thing, there's a moment where we're not as other people. And I think that's a tough part because we live in a society where it's a little bit like be perfect person, work like 60 hours a week and do this and do that. But sometimes we can't like, and it's tough. Like when I talk with my friend who are entrepreneurs was working more hours than I do and be able to say, no, I don't work on weekend. Like at least I take 1.5 days off, and to explain it to them that I need that and it's different. So
Yeah.
another thing, like if you like what we're doing, really just like this video is really important for we can share it and have other people discover it. But I wanted to go back a little bit into like if you were yourself, like talking to you only like a few months ago before this depression,
Mm.
what would you tell yourself?
I would tell myself to keep going, which is something that I've always told myself. And I'm very glad that I have, because I wouldn't be here today speaking with you and doing the things I'm doing in my life if I hadn't just kept going. Now, keeping going for me often meant failing and failing and failing and failing. Um, and then eventually coming up for air and having, time where I'd do well for quite a while. And eventually really digging myself out of my hole with the help of good healthcare. But that was that, like, that would be one that I would really hope for people, is that you will have people that say, oh, maybe you should just drop out. Maybe you should just not do that thing. If it's something that's important to you, keep going. Um, but the bit that I wish that I'd also said, which I'm not so good at saying, is pacing myself. Um, I have a tendency to feel that I should be productive all the time. And as a result, it can mean that I'm not always productive, because sometimes the most productive thing to do is to take a rest. And it doesn't feel productive when you're doing it. But I took the weekend off myself, actually, come on, the other weekend, which I rarely do. And I went, oh, I should do this more often, because I think I actually got a lot more done during the week because I had something to look forward to. And then I felt a lot more rested for the next week. So kind of pacing and being kind to myself. It's really easy, I've found, when I've been depressed, to forget my baseline and what it feels like to feel like Zsofi and to feel like me. And I wish I could remind myself of who that person is when I'm in that state. Um, and when I finally got stable after years of being unwell, I actually had a dear friend of mine from primary school say to me, it's like you're you again after like 15, 20 years. And the essence of me came back and I could feel it. And so I think I wish I could have reminded myself before I have those kind of depressive phases that you're still you. You will come out of this, and that this isn't a reflection of who you are. Because my thing is, I'm not trying hard enough. I just need to push through. I just need to all this thing. But one of the things you'll find is that, you know, like I would never say that to one of my clients, but I'll treat myself that way. And I'll be that hard on myself. But I work with all my clients all the time on this type of stuff. And I always say, go gently, be kind to yourself. Look, what an amazing job that you even got dressed today. that you even went to school today, that you even went to work today, even if you only turned up for an hour. I've had a time actually when I went to the gym. I was really depressed, but I dragged myself to the gym. I got there, I stood on the treadmill, I turned it on for 30 seconds, turned it off, and I went home. But at least I got there. And I think that's the bit that I struggle with, that I have to remind myself. And I would love anyone else who's out there who resonates with what I'm saying, just to remember you're still you. And the best way you can get back to feeling like you is that to show yourself some self-compassion, some love, that this is not something that you can control or push your way out of in the same way you can't with the flu. You've just got to wait for it to pass and be kind to yourself in the interim. And again, when you're, curled up in bed, aching with a fever and whatnot, when you have the flu, is that who you are? No. Is the fact that you can't work while you're doing that, is that who you are? No, you're just not well. And it's the same when you're not well with bipolar. You're still you, you're just not well. And so nurture yourself and let other people nurture you. And that's the other one as well. Let people be there for you. Let people remind you of who you are too, and your essence. And that might be your psychologist, your parents, your partner, your friends, your colleagues. I, for instance, am very blessed that working at the Brain and Mind Center, where I've worked for some time now, my sense with them is they've always seen me. And they're the types of people you want to be around, the people who see you, not your illness. So yeah, I don't know if that answers that.
No, it's beautiful. And yeah, I feel being compassionate to ourselves. And it's not an easy thing to do, and you say it well. But that's why I love talking also with people who have the same condition sometimes, because they make you realize that, yeah, you deserve this little pat on the back and say, hey, you did woke up, you did just I can say about it too. Like for me, just going out when I was depressed was like a victory.
Yeah.
Not even like doing anything else,
Yeah.
And yeah, if you've been here or if you are here, Zsofi said it will pass, and we're also here to help. I think it's one of the things that we do with a non-for-profit. In we have community, we have talking groups. So happy to help you guys, because it's not easy. Like I think we can say it.
It's not easy, and you know what? And in from whatever country you're listening from, and whatever word is appropriate for your community, and in Australia, the word we would use, it sucks. And it's okay just to acknowledge that it sucks. And I, for one, and some people, they get diagnosed, they get a sense of relief. When I got diagnosed, having had it in my family and it didn't look great in my family, I went through a deep, I had the bipolar depression plus the depression and grief of going, is this what I'm living with for the rest of my life? Allow yourself to feel it, and also remember that it can get better. I've found through lived experience, which has really informed my practice, that when my depression flares, it amplifies anything underneath that's bothering me. So I went through a significant loss several years ago, and so it amplified my grief. For some people, it might amplify a breakup, and or it might amplify a job loss, or there might just be a sense of loneliness or whatever. Or relationship rupture in family or whatnot. But I find that's the psychological stuff. If you can get support with that when you do have the biological depression, it doesn't have as much to amplify anymore. Like I went through periods where I had to go, am I grieving or is this my bipolar? And I'm sure there's other people who've been here as well listening to this. So it's like, And that's the other thing. You have to learn how to gauge yourself again. Like, is this the bipolar depression, or am I feeling sad? Or I'm feeling really exhausted, but my mood's normal. Is this bipolar depression? Which it can be, by the way. You can be depressed and have normal mood and just have the fatigue and that stuff. But like, getting those ideas, it's a tricky thing to kind of navigate. And
It's
yeah,
like I'm just looking at the time, even if it's really interesting, but we can do another one. I have one last question.
yeah,
If you had a magic wand, what would you change in mental health?
that's a great question. Um, I would change. I would want there to be more done in terms of early intervention, and recognizing the importance of identifying and targeting conditions like bipolar and other forms of conditions early on, so that there can be support early on. Because I know for me, my teens and half of my 20s were absolutely destroyed by my condition. Like, I was failing uni and I had relationship breakdowns. I found it hard to keep a job, all these things, because I was unwell and I didn't know. And I'd been very help seeking. I'd seen psychiatrists, I'd seen psychologists, and it still didn't get picked up. I got put on treatments that made me more sick because they thought I had ADHD, so they put me on stimulants, which is not so good with bipolar, with ups and all of that stuff. So, those formative years are so important to the rest of your life. And, I'm so grateful for where I am today and what I get to spend my time doing and who I get to interact with. At the same time, I do sometimes wonder, if I hadn't almost, it felt like, lost a decade of my life, what would I be doing now? Where would I be, further along, or would have I have been doing other research or been further with that, or whatever it may be. So that would be my one thing, and personalized care is a really important thing for me. Not so much stock standard. Like, I know from my family, and I don't know if it's the same for you, Clement, but everyone that lives with bipolar, it's different for them. Just like everyone that lives with diabetes, it's different. They're a different person interacting differently with their condition, and their condition has its own life to it. And it's different for everyone. And I think that's a room for improvement for us in healthcare, is to really personalize care to each person and make it a lot more holistic and a lot more wraparound. Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Zsofi, for your time.
No, thank you. It's been a pleasure.
To learn more about bipolarity, go to our website upstage.com, HOPESTAGE.com. See you soon.